something else that's worth CGCing. There are special books that come from special collections. I'm a big EC fan. This is an EC that came from the personal collection of William Gaines, the publisher of EC Comics. As he was publishing his books, he took 13 copies of everything that he ever published, which were called basically the trend books when he took over the company from his father. That's when EC went into crime comics, horror comics, and science fiction comics, and they also had a very good line of war comics called Frontline Combat, and a line of adventure comics called Two-Fisted Tales. William Gaines put away 13 copies of everything he ever published. Many years later, this was in, say, the 1990s, he went into his closet and he had brown butcher, he had kept these things and wrapped them in brown butcher paper. He undid them, and out of them popped these magnificent copies, which are the best copies that still survive of EC Comics, and they all graded in the 9s and above. This copy graded a 9.6. There might be a copy or two above it, but it's one of the 13 best copies probably that ever existed. Still, it was totally untouched for over, this was from 1951, for over 64 years, okay? One of the best things about CGC is the fact that they, aside from grading books, they also do what we call as a restoration check, which is very important once you get into the very, very valuable books and the higher end books. It is very easy for a novice to get taken. You could end up buying a book for $50,000 or $100,000 and be taken by a scam artist, and there are some notorious scam artists still alive who dealt long time on eBay, who have now gone to Amazon, in fact, and they know what they're doing as far as ripping people off. And if you don't know what you're doing, you could buy a time bomb of a comic book. This is a comic that I bought as a total rag. It was in 3 pieces. There was the cover, the front cover, totally split apart, and the body of the book. And it was horrible. But it was basically all there. You know, the cover was torn, it was ripped, it was dirty, it was a mess. You really couldn't, you could barely handle the book, okay? I sent this to a good friend of mine. His name is Mike DeChillis, who has a company called Hero Restoration. The abilities nowadays of comic book restoration artists is incredible. There are legitimate ones and there are illegitimate ones, okay? Mike is a legitimate restoration artist, and what he does, he documents and he will detail and tell you about it and charge you a good deal of money for it. Mike charged me, I think it was $700 or so, to take this from what was basically a 1.0, you know, unrestored book all the way up to a 6.5 restored. He did leaf casting, which is adding all kind of paper to all the missing pieces out of it, to every single page, I believe, on here. He did recoloring, color touch-up, adding pieces, pressing the book. He just did a magnificent job. But the thing is, once a comic book is restored and it's no longer the natural condition that it was originally found in, that means that the value of it is much less than if this was a 6.5 unrestored book. CGC does a restoration check, and when you get your comics back, you're going to know if there is any color touch or anything that's been done to manipulate this comic in a bad way. That is one of the great bonuses of getting your book CGC graded. If you buy a book, a valuable book from somebody, and they claim that it is a unrestored book, it might behoove you to get that book rapidly to CGC to get the proof that it is a unrestored book, because if it is a restored book and you've been had, you want to get back to that person right away to get your money back. The actual value of a restored book generally versus a unrestored book could be as much as half of the value of it. So if this was actually a 6.5, excuse me, unrestored, this would be worth, maybe $6,000 or more. As a restored book, it's not worth much more than, say, $3,000. Okay. Well, in this case, you have to do the math. I bought this book for a small amount of money in the horrible shape it was. Add on to that the $700 I added on to it, and if I were to sell this book, I would still make a decent profit on it because I had less than maybe $1,000 in it. If I could turn around and sell it for $3,000, I made a handsome profit on it. As opposed to if I had sold the book as it was as a rag, I might have paid $300 for it, and I might have gotten $4 or $5. I probably wouldn't have doubled my money. Plus, now you have something you could be proud to handle. And being that it's been divulged fully by Mike, the restoration, and by CGC, there's no problem about liquidating this book and giving it to somebody else under any false pretenses of it's not what it appears to be. It is a restored book. One of the best books in my collection, in fact, I have a full run of Batman, and I do not have a unrestored Batman #1. I bought this a couple years ago, surprisingly off of eBay, from a collector, okay, who knew what he bought. He had bought it from Metropolis, and he had originally bought it for $10,000 or a little less many years back, and he ended up selling it to me for $12,000. So he made a couple thousand on the book. If this book in 7.0 was totally unrestored, it would easily be a $100,000 book. In the condition that it is as restored and the extensive professional restoration that was done on this, it's only worth about half of that. So it's about a $50,000 book. So that's one of the good reasons to get a book CGC'd. But it could be a problem for you too if you end up with books that you didn't know were restored and you find that they were restored. For the most part, well, we send in raw books to CGC, and you have to know what you're doing. You have to know what books have value and what books will get added value by CGCing them, and you have to be able to pre-grade that. You can't just assume that something will get a certain grade and it's worthwhile to send into CGC. You have to know what you're doing. So if you don't know what you're doing, go to your local comic shop and find out if they're a CGC dealer, and they will assist you. They're going to charge you for it, as they should. This is just like getting your coins assessed or your stamps assessed or an antique assessed. It takes them time and effort and their knowledge, and you have to pay them for it. Don't expect them to do this for you for free, okay?
Okay, so CGC, they are the recognized experts in the industry.
They are the only people who do it.
Okay.
Well, there is another company who is hugely disreputable, who nobody who knows anything relies on those people, and they're very marginal, but they've come under fire very rapidly because they have manipulated some books for their own benefit, and they've put some things in their sealed books, some sealed books that they knew had been manipulated as far as being trimmed and other types of stories like that they have done for their special people or for themselves, which is a huge conflict of interest,
Do you want to name a name?
Do I want to name a name? Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
Yeah, but the people in the know who they are.
Okay.
Okay, so these are some of the books that I'm preparing to send in. You have to be able to grade the book.
Now you're going to send these into CGC?
Right, because...
Could we follow the process then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, first of all, you got to have a CGC form with an invoice number, and it takes a good deal of work and understanding of comic books to know what the hell you're doing. Once again, you might have to find yourself a CGC dealer to help you do this if you have older, valuable books. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you're even going to have a hard time figuring out exactly when these comics were printed and what they are. There are reprints of comics. There are second editions of a lot of things. Getting the correct title and the correct dates on them and numbers and everything too. It could be something that's a little hard to navigate.
How does one become a CGC authorized dealer?
You apply for it. I'm assuming they still do it. I've been a CGC dealer for a long period of time, but if you have a comic shop, I believe it's pretty easy to get it. As far as I know, they still allow you, if you're an actual dealer in comics, they'll give you a dealership. It doesn't cost you, well, it didn't cost me anything then. I don't think it costs anything anymore, okay? And being a dealer, you actually do get a discount on the prices on doing it too, because they're assuming you're going to be sending in wholesale amounts and bulk amounts versus an individual who's going to send, you know, small amounts in. And I do take in things for our other customers, you know, to send in too. And I have a few things here to send in. Looking at the census and considering that DC Comics, especially DC Comics prior to 1962, are often quite hard to find in conditions that amount to 8.5, 8.0s or better. Marvel Comics, because they appeal to an older audience and started in 1962, are much easier to find in the higher grades than DC Comics, which kind of tried to appeal to a younger audience. And the people then, and also prior to 1962, didn't think that comics were ever going to amount to anything, and generally didn't keep them in that great a shape. Also, certain types of comics are harder to find in better shape. Boys who were into war comics generally weren't the same people who were into excuse me, the superhero comics, and they passed their stuff around, and they weren't usually found in, aren't usually found in higher grade copies. And if you check the census, you'll find out that these DC war books from the mid-50s are actually quite hard to find in anything from 6.0 and above. After checking the census, I found out that maybe that there's only one copy in 8.0 of this, and there might not be any others. So even though this copy might only grade for a 6.0 or a 7.0, it might be worthwhile to send into CGC because it's going to be perhaps a top census copy, the second best copy in existence. And this might also be, and this contains a very nice Joe Kubert cover, one of the greats of the comic industry, who went on later on in Our Army at War to have his most famous character, which was Sergeant Rock, which is the top war character of all time. Okay, even though people don't know who Sergeant Rock is. They had planned at one time to do a Sergeant Rock movie with Arnold, and somehow it fell through. But of the war comics, there is no greater character than Sergeant Rock. He's not in here. He came about a little later in the issue number of 80s. But these are both superior copies of books, you know, from a time period when